Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us back for our second policy today. So we're going to move on to our last policy of the summit by Youth Move from Pennsylvania, and we have three presenters. The first presenter is Christopher. He is someone with lived experiences in child serving mental health system who has taken his experience with mental illness and recovery to become an advocate and leader for youth and young adults who experience mental health challenges. Originally from New Mexico, he now resides in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where he has been trained as a certified peer specialist and serves as the Call for Change and Youth Care Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association. And then we have Amy, who graduated from a peer specialist certification training in Pennsylvania. Since certification, Amy has worked as a certified peer specialist in a community-based settings, residential settings, and as a peer support supervisor. In December 2018, her devoted efforts resulted in recognition by the National Association for Peer Supporters as she receives the Disruptive Innovator Award, highlighting her work in youth peer leadership and honoring her as a young adult who has made a significant transformative contribution to the field of peer support through leadership, programming, and activism. And lastly, we have Kevin. He became a certified peer specialist in 2017 and later certified in 2021 as a certified recovery specialist and a certified family recovery specialist. His training and lived experiences brings skills in leadership, youth engagement, and bringing youth peer support values to the forefront in his role as the Program Director of the Youth Move Pennsylvania. And I'm going to hand it on to them to present the policy.
Thank you so much for that introduction. We are so happy to be here today. Hopefully everybody can see my screen at this point. I'm Amy Detmer, and joining me is Kevin and Chris, as our bios were just read. And today we are here to present a presentation that we're calling Youth Peer Support in Pennsylvania, an overview of policy and practices promoted throughout Pennsylvania. I do want to acknowledge that this entire presentation and a lot of what we're talking about is through a partnership between the Copeland Center for Wellness and Recovery and Youth Move Pennsylvania, which is under the umbrella of the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association. So with that being said, we're going to go a little bit more into our own introductions, and I'll start us off, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kevin. So my name's Amy. Once again, I do use she, her pronouns, and I have worked at the Copeland Center for Wellness and Recovery for about 8 years, primarily under our National Consumer Technical Assistance Center, which we refer to as Doors to Wellbeing. I've been involved in youth work since I became a certified peer specialist in 2011, and I've been doing this work passionately for the last 13 years. I was 21 when I first became certified, and I just have an immense passion for transformation of our youth serving systems, and that is what brings me here today. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks for having us. So my name is Kevin Piskaric. I'm a certified peer specialist, certified recovery specialist, and certified family recovery specialist. I struggled with substance use and mental health from the age of 15 to 16 years old, and struggled for many years with both until finding my recovery pathway. So youth peer support is something I am super passionate about because I did not have a pathway of peer support when I was a youth. So I worked at the county level for probably about 4 years, and I've been the program director at Youth Move PA for about 2.5 years now. Super happy to be here and share on youth peer support and peer generation, which we're going to share about with you here in a little bit. And I will kick it over to Chris for his introduction.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Amy. And thank you all for the wonderful introductions. So my name's Chris. I'm the Call for Change and Youth Care Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association. So I did receive my certified peer specialist training in 2020, and that's where I got my certification as well. And before then, I just identified as an individual with lived experience in the mental health system. I struggled with mental illness from a very young age, from like 5 years old all the way throughout, my school career, and I'm in active recovery from mental illness as an adult. And so, that kind of ignited my passion to become an advocate, especially for youth and young adult voice, as I had to struggle through that to advocate for myself and find a way to be personally empowered to get my needs met as well. So I wanted to share that experience with others to help uplift other youth just like myself, which I did in a live stream setting on Twitch for a very long time before I found this work as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. We got a lot of information to cover. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and kick it back on over to Kevin. We're going to go ahead and get started.
Okay. So we're going to talk about peer support policies and practices in Pennsylvania. First off, peer support in Pennsylvania, the certification process starts off, the competencies and testing are set and delivered by the Pennsylvania Certification Board. And the Copeland Center, which Amy works for, is a PCB approved training vendor for the CPS training. There are 2 other PCB approved training vendors, and Copeland Center is one of those 3. The training is 80 hours in person course hours, and you must be 18 years old to be eligible for certification. We at Youth Move PA and PMHCA have a youth and young adult certified peer specialist and enhancement training that's offered through us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. This youth and young adult peer training, it's an enhancement for the peer workforce. So what this looks like is you get trained as a certified peer specialist, and you would take this training as an enhancement training. This would enhance your skills when working with that youth and young adult demographic of 14 to 27-year-olds. It would give you ongoing support and technical assistance for working with youth peers, give you skill building and knowledge to bolster youth's ability to provide services to that demographic, and self-care. Self-care is so important when working in this field, reducing the impact of compassion fatigue and burnout. And it would increase your understanding of the family dynamic within youth peer support, and case studies to reinforce that importance of ethics and boundaries when working in this field, which is also very, very important.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So when we're talking about peer support and getting certified for it, it's important too to understand like what the service is. So this is a Medicaid funded service. Certified peer specialists deliver peer support under that Medicaid billing system. So we're just going to kind of give a brief overview here, and then we'll take a look at the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services bulletin that details a little bit more. So OMSAS, there's a bulletin that they put out about all of their policies, and this one about peer support states that peer support is billable through Medicaid for ages 14 and up for those who meet eligibility requirements. So this is referencing youth peer support specifically. The eligibility requirements are that the individual being served has to be 14 years of age and older, but under 27 years of age, have the presence of or a history of a serious emotional disturbance or a serious mental illness, have a written recommendation for peer support services from a licensed practitioner of the healing arts that's acting within the scope of professional practice. So that would be someone like, your primary care physician, your psychiatrist, things like that. And the person has to choose to receive these peer support services. They are voluntary services to receive. It cannot be impressed upon another person who does not wish to receive peer support services. From the provider side, their requirements are that they must be a provider to provide Medicaid billable services. So in order to offer peer support to the community, they have to already be a peer provider that's offering Medicaid billable services. They also have to contact OMSAS's regional office and inform the licensing team that they're going to start or to change services. So this would be if, it's a new a new provider opening up to offer the service, or an existing one that is going to start offering peer services. They need to change their service description as well to expand CPS services to offer youth peer support ages 14 to 17. So that means like if somebody's already offering peer support, but they want to get into the youth space, they just need to make sure that they update their service description to reflect that. So there's some stipulations there as far as the age range. Depending on the funding source, it will determine whether or not they're able to provide services to youth up to 21 and 27. And then finally, the peer provider employees have to be eligible to work with youth by passing all clearances and background checks. We want to make sure that the service being provided is by ethical individuals and that they're not going to, provide liability or put the individuals being served at risk in any way. What we're looking at right here, there's a lot of words, so we kind of tried to highlight some stuff that we thought stood out to us in this policy, but this is the official bulletin that came out of the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse in Pennsylvania. So one of the first things you might notice is that this bulletin was issued in 2016 on December 12th. So it is a 7-year-old bulletin at this point. But this is talking about youth peer support services. So if you don't know what peer support is, we got a bit of a description here that I'll read to you. So peer support services are intended to inspire hope in individuals that recovery is not only possible, but probable. The service is designed to promote empowerment, self-determination, understanding, coping skills, as well as resiliency. And it does that through mentoring and service coordination supports that allow individuals that have serious mental illness or serious emotional disturbance and co-occurring disorders to achieve that personal wellness and cope with the stressors and barriers that are encountered when you're recovering from those types of disabilities. So really what this is saying is that it is telling people who experience mental health challenges that recovery is possible and providing a service that reinforces that every step of the way by empowering the individual. So that's peer support in a nutshell. And this was offered to adults long before the door was open to offer it to youth and young adults. In our state, we started seeing it become more prominent around 2004, 2005, and it's just been expanding ever since. So the purpose of what we're talking about today is centered around this policy of offering peer support to youth and young adults that are ages 14 and up.
But to what Chris is saying here, today's presentation is really about how can peer support look in Pennsylvania and what is like the policies of our state that allow us to be able to offer it. So some of the things that we really want to keep in mind when it comes to when we're talking about youth peer support is peer support values. Now you could go into the National Association of Peer Supporters, and in there you can see documents regarding the best practices and values of peer supporters. And what we've done is we've taken this a little bit further, specifically to youth. So one thing overall about peer supporters is that we're here to facilitate change. And I think that really speaks to this first statement of youth peer support supports moving away from harsh exclusionary practices towards community-based services and community inclusion. So this is things like working to change like what you may be familiar as called the school to prison pipeline, which includes young people going into juvenile justice centers and into residential treatment facilities, into wilderness camps, therapeutic boarding schools, anywhere that were removed from like normal society and placed in an alternative setting is a harsh exclusionary practice. So peer support is really moving away from that. I spoke to my passion, and this is really where it's driven from, because I was a youth placed in a residential facility that I felt was harsh and exclusionary. So we're working here in peer support, promoting these values to move away from those types of things that we can sometimes view as harmful. So some values to keep in mind when we're thinking about youth peer support is that as much as possible, we try to keep it youth to youth, have an age closeness when we're able to serve people of similar age, always keeping that in mind. That mentoring is multi-directional, meaning that we always have something to learn from anybody and from everybody. And if we're a young person receiving mentoring from an older adult, like we can learn from them, and vice versa. They can learn from us as well. Community inclusion, that we can participate in services that are part of our community in meaningful ways that we get to self-direct and choose what's meaningful to us in participating in our community. It's also about that the focus can be on all youth, not just youth with serious emotional disturbances, mental health, or substance use challenges, where we get to be a part of schools, a part of communities, just like everyone else, and not placed into some kind of alternative school or alternative setting to participate in our own communities. And then we really like to promote this value that youth peer support is mutual. That there is a giving and receiving of support and of help throughout the relationships that are developed. Also, one thing that I'll say in regards to all of this that we're talking about is sometimes this youth peer support can look like a one-on-one offering of services, a one-on-one conversation, but it can also look as a group model. And that's what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of today's session, is a group model that the Copeland Center and Youth Move Pennsylvania are partnering on to bring to anywhere that we can, honestly, in Pennsylvania, keeping these values in mind. So Kevin, if you want to take it to the next slide, I'll start talking about this group model, which is what we call the Peer Generation Youth Empowerment Training. This is a training that is really an introduction to what peer support is, not the certification course or the enhancement course that Kevin spoke about earlier, but an opportunity to just be introduced to a peer environment, to learn how to build a sense of resiliency, build a sense of community with others, and explore pathways to interpersonal discovery. So getting more in touch with ourselves, more in touch with what's formed who we are, who we want to be, what our goals are, all these things that exist within us, but sometimes we don't give enough time to really explore. And then again, an opportunity to be connected to what youth peer support is all about and what happens in a peer support space. Also, I guess another thing that I'll just add to this is, for me, this is a training that's also introducing our younger generation to potential career pathways. In the peer workforce, it seems that younger people getting involved seems to lessen. So this is also an approach to not just introduce people to what it is and how you can get it and where you can access peer support, but how they could make a career out of it if it's something that people are interested in as well. And I'll go through one other slide, which is just to develop or talk about the history of the development of this training. And I will just kind of bring back to, if anybody was here yesterday, Lydia Prowl talked from Youth Move National about Heart's Ladder and how there's these different tiers of what youth engagement looks like. And I want to say that I have the fortunate opportunity to have been involved in the development of Peer Generation since its birth. And we really tried our best to use a model that was like those top 1 and 2 tiers of being fully youth developed and youth designed, and sometimes having a support adult mentor along the way. So what this development looked like is, in 2017, a national work group, people from all over the country came together. We were between ages of 18 and 27. And we had one adult mentor that was supporting the development of a by youth for youth curriculum. After the development of it, which is a 3-day training, we're going to talk about that in a minute, we were able to begin pilot trainings, and we tried to really strategically do this in different areas, rural communities, urban communities, different geographical areas. So we went to Nebraska, we did in-person trainings in Pennsylvania, we went to South Florida and Washington, D.C. to pilot this training and really build an efficacy and test, is this working and is this resonating with folks? COVID happened, that paused some things. So then we started forward movement again in 2022, where the curriculum became copyrighted by the Copeland Center. We started partnering with Youth Move Pennsylvania, and that partnership has meant the world to the further development of this, where we continue to develop an online model of this curriculum. And in 2023, just last month, we were able to bring this to 4 high schools in Pennsylvania. So that was quite a success. And something I'm so happy about. I can't wait to share more about, and I'm going to pass it back over to Chris to take us through the next slide.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, it really has been a pretty amazing journey from 2017 to now with peer generation. So this was really cool. I had the opportunity to be one of the facilitators for that training where we went into 4 different high schools and worked with students there to just develop, or not develop, but like bring this training to them and develop their own skills around it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the curriculum that we brought to them and sort of the things that they learned throughout that experience too. So as Amy mentioned, it's a 3-day curriculum. And on the first day, we really focus on like developing these foundations of youth resiliency. So there are 4 of them that we really explore. We explore the foundation of hope, connection, self-determination, and meaning. And we do this by bringing an interactive activity, or a series of interactive activities to the youth that are participating in this training. So they get a chance to, create collages and vision boards and make their own definitions of things like, connection and meaning, and really challenge to answer some questions about themselves, some reflective questions about themselves that they might not have ever been asked before. So day 1 is really about like getting deep into the self and understanding who I am, what makes me tick as an individual, which we found to be really empowering for youth. So they build that self-esteem through the self-reflection. And then as we continue through the curriculum, we start to explore culture and identity through our communities. So we start to get into day 2 with having established this foundation of self. And now we're looking at like, how do we connect with other people? How do we resonate with each other? So there's a lot more group activities that help to support this. We highlight each other's strengths and things like that too. And then we start to really delve into this piece where we're starting to explore peer support. Usually we have youth that are like, we don't know what peer support is. How does this relate to peer support? But then towards the end of day 2 and into day 3, we start to really explore that, and it starts to click. We're like, yes, we're able to support other people better when we're able to understand ourselves and support ourselves. So that's where we start to navigate empowerment, and we start to create some goals for youth success as well. So one thing I do want to close off on that is just that, this being a 3-day experience, you really get to see how the youth evolve throughout the course of this training. And from day 1 to day 3, you really see this change where people are kind of timid and nervous about what they're getting into and not sure how to answer questions on the self, or even how to like determine like who they are, right? But by day 3, they have this stronger understanding of themselves. And I'll let Amy kind of go into that a little bit more later, because we're going to cover that too. But it just really is a cool thing to see.
Yeah, so peer support in schools, as Chris and Amy were talking about, we took this into the school settings, and it was really awesome. I wasn't a facilitator in the student training. What we didn't mention is we also did a similar training, a simultaneous training with the faculty. The schools we did it in, the faculty wanted to take the same 3-day training. And I can tell you from being a facilitator in the faculty training, the faculty was actually blown away by the training model. They were absolutely engaged the whole training. They loved the activities. It was a pretty cool experience facilitating the faculty training. So schools all around the country are beginning to explore and incorporate peer support programs within school settings, and definitely in Pennsylvania, they are. I can tell you that just from experience and being on some meetings that we've been doing it throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So these programs and components of these need to be student-led and student-driven. And trainings for youth that teaches basic peer support skills, and then collaboration between students and faculty with program transparency and student involvement. And I think that's really why the high schools in this county, why the faculty wanted to take the training simultaneously with their students, because they wanted to be transparent with each other. They wanted to experience what the students were experiencing in the same training. It was separate trainings. Students were in one room, faculty were in the next room, but they wanted to know outside of the training, you know, months down the road, if they were viewing and seeing what was going on in the schools, they were being able to experience and know that they were seeing peer support going on in their schools. And youth peer support values are obviously to be adhered to. And we talked about some of those youth peer support values that Amy talked about. So we're going to talk a little about implementation. And one thing I will say about this, and specifically in a school setting, you're going to really need to work with the schools. You really need to be open-minded. You really need to be willing to work with the schools. And there's a couple different models and a couple different ways this can go. You can do a 3-day in-person model, or you can do online sessions. We did do a virtual pilot, like Amy said. Both worked very well. Students can go through and do step 1 and take a PG, peer generation youth empowerment facilitator training and receive facilitation mentoring or technical assistance. And then peer generation facilitators offer peer generation youth empowerment to other students and peers. Like I said, what we found out through working with schools, we have built relationships with school faculty, school counselors. That has been great. It has taken time to do. What we have found out is you're really working with school boards and key decision makers when working with these schools. You're working with testing times during school, students being a little skeptical to step out of class for 3 days because they're really worried about their grades. So these are all things to keep in mind. If you want to bring this to a school, this doesn't have to be done in a school. As Amy said, you can take this into a peer-run organization, a community-based setting, whatever you would want to do. But these are all things to keep in mind if you want to bring this into certain settings.
So as we continue to work on the delivery of this curriculum, the partnerships with whether it's states or schools or other organizations that are out there just supporting people in the community, we are at a place where we definitely recognize there needs to be some data to really show that this is an effective, helpful program. So early on, when we first started in 2017, we basically were collecting a lot of anecdotal data, asking open-ended questions of how is this experience for you? What did you get out of it? And these were some of the results. People said that it served as a catalyst for personal growth, that it supported a healing journey and new ways of looking at past experiences, that it offered me more healing in 3 days than I have gotten out of 2 years of therapy. People also said this experience has shown me that we are all so much more connected to each other than I first realized, that I loved spending time getting to know myself better, and that it's hard to find time to do this. People said that everyone has their own struggles and their own ways to get better. And one of my personal favorites is I am not alone. And I love how it's in this environment that it's sometimes the very first time an individual is coming in and saying, wow, there's other people that are feeling like me, that are thinking like me, and I'm not alone in whatever struggle it is that I am going through. So this is how we first started doing our data. And now that we are really having this launch even more than we anticipated, we're moving into another set of how we are collecting data. And what we're doing here is we are offering pre-surveys and post-surveys. So anyone that's going through the training gets to take a survey before it starts, and then they take the exact same survey when it ends. And we have some data analytic experts from Temple University that are supporting us in collecting and analyzing some of this data. And what we have here is percentages based on chi tests that allow us to really see the impact of what this training is doing. So far, what we've captured is that out of all the trainings in 2023 in Pennsylvania, there's been 3 of them. 19.27% of an increase to the following. I am confident in my ability to make myself feel better when I am distressed. There's a 27.77% increase in the question of, I know what I want for my future when it comes to my academic life. A 16.66% increase in, I am comfortable accessing and sharing resources in my community. And then a outstanding 29.76% increase in, I know what I want for my future when it comes to seeking employment and career pathways. And I'm going to pass it over to Chris to give a couple other data points of what we were able to collect so far.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, the data is really fascinating around this, and we were so excited to see such a positive uptick. So a few of the next 3 slides are just going to cover 3 more examples of kind of what Amy's been talking about too, and sharing our findings with these trainings. So we have before and after, before on the left, after on the right. So the question was, I can confidently explain to others what peer support is. We saw a 32.28% increase in responses to this. So people were saying that they really understood what peer support was and how they could tell other people about it, feeling confident in explaining it. We also saw an increase in response to, I feel like I can relate to and connect with people that come from different backgrounds and cultures than me. There's an 11.11 increase in an increase in responses to this item, which you feel free to make an 1111 wish if that's your thing too. But I love this one. Maybe it's just the pie graph. It just closed down on there and it looked really, really cool, but I love to see that increase. And then finally, I feel confident in my ability to share tools for wellness and resiliency with others. 30.56% increased to almost always true in feeling like they could share these tools with other people that they learned through this curriculum. So we really saw some wonderfully positive results from this, and made us really excited to be able to share this with you today and bring it to more individuals across the country and within the state of Pennsylvania. So at this time, oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to thank everybody as well. I think Amy and I were on the same page there. Thank everybody for listening to our presentation on this. And again, this is tying into Pennsylvania's youth peer support policy as a potential pathway to delivering and increasing the peer support workforce with youth and young adults. So I know we have a Q&A coming up, so I'd like to open the floor to that now.
Thank you for your presentation and your commitment to improve youth life. My school has a similar system, so reading your application about a connection to your organization. However, before I pass up to other youth panelists, I did witness some challenges with my school with our youth support system that I would like to ask you questions about. The first being, how are you making sure that young people feel comfortable talking to their peers in the school, and how you maintain confidentiality in schools?
Yeah, I'm comfortable taking this one if that's okay with y'all. So, you know, when we're delivering the curriculum, one of the first things that we do is to establish this rapport, not just between ourselves and the students, but also with themselves. So we really reinforce creating a safe space to share and open up to being able to experience these sometimes challenging emotions and challenging discoveries that might be happening for the first time in this safe setting. And then what we've seen with that is it's a demonstration, right? It's us modeling these peer values like Kevin and Amy were talking about, where they can see it in action, and that creates a feeling. And what we're hoping, because obviously we're not, following up and going into the school with them afterwards to like enforce confidentiality or enforce, ethical implementation or something like that. But we're really providing are these tools and these skill sets that they get to practice in a safe environment, see and feel the effects of, not just on themselves, but in other people as well. And then we're hoping that they carry that back to the school setting with them, where they can use that to support their peers, and they can more accurately read, oh, this is probably something that should stay between us, or maybe this is something that they would feel more comfortable getting some additional support with someone that they trust, right? And they're just feeling more equipped to be able to navigate that on their own.
And just to add to that, if that's okay too, I loved your answer there, Chris. I think that, it really starts with what are we sharing as facilitators of this? And are we sharing things that we're comfortable sharing? So I think that's one way that we create this safety is by we're not talking down to people, we're talking with them and we're getting vulnerable and we're getting ourselves out there in a way that, again, maybe these young people haven't experienced before. So I think it starts with that modeling. And then secondly, one of the things that we do every day in the training is we make time for what we call developing support. And one of the things that happens there, which you might be familiar with group agreements or things like that. We do it a little bit differently here, which is around how are we going to support ourselves? So for example, as a facilitator, I might say, I'm going to support myself in this by only sharing things that I'm comfortable sharing, which kind of also helps create that space. I think that the confidentiality thing can be a really complicated issue for the sense that as much as we could say in this room, what's said here stays here, we don't actually have control of what happens outside of that room. So it's this delicate thing of coming back to what Chris said is how do we in this training talk about values and being there for each other and being able to navigate how do we make decisions around when our peers are telling us things or there's things being shared that we do not need to go on and share further than that, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for your answer. And I'll pass it on to the other youth panelists with their questions.
Hello. Hi, my name is Julie. I'm actually working on something very similar to what y'all submitted. My question about the training is that did the people who received the training receive compensation?
So that's a great question. I hear, did the people that participated in the training, did they receive compensation for participating? In Pennsylvania, no, that has not been the case. What in the 3 trainings that we've done in 2023, they were free to all attendees. So nobody had to pay for any of the trainings. And when we did it with the school, what we did was it was during their school day. So they were excused from their regular classes, their regular schedule, and brought to a separate location where the training could be conducted, where multiple schools kind of came together and offered this. So it was kind of an alternative to regular school setting days.
Okay. I also have another question. Okay, we only talked about the training. Well, y'all already talked about the training. What happened after the training? Were the participants given a certificate? Yeah,
Like a certificate.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm sorry, Kevin, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, I was just going to say participants were given a certificate of completion for the course. So were the faculty. So both students and faculty were given certificates of completion. We did a huge debrief after the training, got feedback from the students on how the training was to see what their feedback was. And we are also doing another meeting session with the faculty to do another meeting with them, and then possibly we're doing another second round of trainings with their school district, setting up for, I believe, October. So we're going back into their schools again to do another second round of trainings.
Okay. So after they receive their certification, is the school setting, is there a separate room for them to talk to their peers about what they're feeling or their struggles? How does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just want to clarify that the certificate that they receive at the end of this, it doesn't provide them with a certification to be peer specialists. So trying to come back to what this training does is it serves as that introduction to peer support values and what it can look like in a peer setting for youth and young adults. And so as Amy was mentioning a little bit earlier on in the presentation, there are steps. I think maybe Kevin was talking about this with implementation. The third step is to create this follow-up of, all right, now they've taken this training, they're interested in getting involved in peer generation. Now, how can they support themselves and support the peer workforce by going and getting CPS certification? And how can we provide assistance with that? And what would that look like? So during this training that we've talked about here, the students didn't receive a certification for being peer specialists, so they wouldn't be able to go and practice it within the schools in a formal setting, like a Medicaid billable setting. But they do have the skills that would give them a head start should they pursue that as a career pathway. And they'll already be able to model those values within their school setting in a non-traditional, more community-based setting.
And the hope, I'm sorry, I was going to say the hope is to build student facilitators in school districts in the future too. So it's not us as Youth Move PA or Copeland staff persons going in and doing the facilitation. It's actually students facilitating with some of our staff, not just us as the staff doing the facilitating. We want to have student facilitators as well.
Do y'all provide the training for peer support specialists or no?
The Copeland Center does. Amy can talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we felt that this was like the perfect partnership is like, okay, here we can go in and we can introduce young people to what peer support is all about. They can go back into the school and like offer support to one another, just, you know, genuinely, like it's already happening in schools. Peers, friends go to friends more often than maybe they go to their parents or other people that they're getting services from. So it's already happening. And this training just kind of solidifies some of those skills a little bit more, but doesn't give that certification, as Chris said. But the reason why this partnership was so great is because in Pennsylvania, the Copeland Center is one of 3 approved certified peer specialist training vendors. So we can give the 2-week training. After that, any participant in that needs to take a certification exam. Once they pass that certification exam, then they're a peer specialist. And then from there, they can go on over to Youth Move PA and take the youth peer support enhancement training. So we're not just introducing them to this environment, but then like, how do they get connected to the next steps? And we've also talked about like prioritizing building that youth workforce. One of the like challenges in Pennsylvania is a requirement of becoming certified as a peer specialist is you have to be 18. So, you know, how do we kind of set up a training that is specifically for people at that age point so that they can then go back in and support too. And then like Kevin was saying, you know, really the goal is working with schools to continue this focus on youth facilitators. So all of the 20 students that went through this training last month with us, when we do phase 2 with the school districts that we're working with, this will include elevating those 20 youth if they're interested in getting to a place of becoming facilitators themselves and then going back in and letting it be this like just cycle of support within the school setting.
Okay, so basically what this policy that you're talking about, it only provides training to like introduce what peer support is, not like give them the certification to practice it in school settings.
Yeah,
That's
because
correct.
of barriers that exist for that. But alongside of some of the other work that we're doing together collaboratively is also like educating our systems that youth peer support is something that can happen and advocating for school mental health treatment teams and things like that to start incorporating peer support in there. So we're informing about all of those like OMSAS bulletins that Chris went over and all of this other information so that more peer support can be provided through those pathways of who does have the certification that may be over the age of 18, but able to provide that service to youth.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a follow-up question for you. Peer support was actually my first job at the age of 14, so it's got a soft spot in my heart. Peer mentorship is really important for those of us with lived experience. Sometimes being a peer mentor is a toll. It's exhausting. Sometimes there's just not enough support for us with lived experience to be able to support other young people currently going through what we've been through, right? So I'm just trying to figure out, as Youth Move PA, do you all have peer supports yourselves? And if you do, how are you supporting those young people in their roles to make sure they're protected, supported, and encouraged in their work with other young people?
So we don't provide Medicaid billable services. Chris and I specifically have provided Medicaid billable services when we worked at the county level. So trust me, we know exactly what you're talking about. We have a limited amount of staff at Youth Move PA. It consists of myself, Chris, and one other employee. So we do statewide work with three employees. So we don't provide one-on-one certified peer direct services. So I trust me, I know 100% of what you're saying. I provided direct service for 4 years, youth peer support specifically. Yeah, self-care and taking care of yourself becomes a huge thing when providing direct service. So to answer your question, no, we don't provide direct service, but we provide continuing education for those who work in the field, specifically self-care, suicide prevention, trauma-informed trainings, a lot of stuff, and enhancement trainings as well, like I talked about earlier, which kind of concentrate on some of those specific issues that you're talking about.
Thank you so much.
If I could add to that too, like, we are a peer-run organization, and like Kevin said, you know, having lived experience with mental health, but also lived experience providing services, like we know what that self-care has to look like too. So we, like, the culture that our staff has is very supportive of one another. Like, it's not uncommon to come together and say, you know what, I'm having a tough day today, and here's why. And then we have a conversation around that. So we support each other in that way. And we take mental health seriously because it, like you mentioned, that compassion fatigue is real, right? So you gotta reinforce your coworkers with that stuff, and then we take that and infuse that culture into all of our programs and our trainings too.
I have a quick question. I come from a very similar background in peer-to-peer support and know how beneficial it can be kind of outside of the education space. So while we know that peer-to-peer support is not a substitute for clinical services, I'm really curious to know how this model has kind of supplemented the professional mental health workforce in the state. Kind of like if it has helped the workload of providers and public health professionals, or if there are plans to kind of measure that in the future, especially with like regard to outreach and things like that.
So I can say one, Chris, you can go after me if that's cool. Is that cool? I can say it's definitely filled a gap. I can say there's huge wait times. I'm sure it's just not in Pennsylvania to see any type of clinician, a therapist, a counselor. The wait times are just off the wall. I mean, it's probably 3 to 4 months in to see any type of therapist. So peer support, you can definitely get in a lot quicker. I just know for me, we're not putting it as peer support versus clinician. It's a tool. Me speaking from lived experience, you know, medication's a tool for me. Therapy is a tool for me. I utilize both. I know when I was younger, if back in, let's say 2005, 2006, if I would have known that peer support was a tool that I could have accessed, I would have definitely accessed it. If there would have been someone there that said, hey, I can sympathize and empathize with what you're going through. This is what I kind of did. Maybe it would have changed my recovery trajectory. That's just me, but you know, maybe not. I don't know. I went through what I went through. You know, I struggled for decades, and you know, that's just me though. But it's a tool. It's another pathway. I just don't put it as clinicians versus peer support. It's another tool. I just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I would agree with Kevin. Being a person with lived experience for most of my life too, like I saw a lot of therapists and a lot of psychiatrists, a lot of doctors, but I didn't know anything about peer support until, I was well into my recovery as an adult, and then learned about it as a profession. I was like, you can just help other people out with your experience and get paid for that. Like, that's pretty awesome. So like I jumped into that and it was exciting. But because of that, like we did find that it filled a lot of gaps. So like an example of this might be like, I remember I was meeting with a young person for a long time, and they were in between, homes, dealt with homelessness for a while, were in housing programs and then would get discharged and have to find another housing program. And during that time, they're only able to meet with their therapist every so often, or they're only able to meet with their psychiatrist so often, or maybe they move to a different location and now they're out of plan for their previous therapist. And, what do? I was able to be there as a peer specialist in between all of these spaces where they were like trying to figure out how to reestablish services. And it's cool because peer support in Pennsylvania, we're allowed to meet with the individual up to 3 times per week, up to 4 hours at a time. So this was a really great way for me to be able to say like, hey, buddy, what are you going through this week? Do you need some extra time? Like we can schedule some extra appointments. Maybe I can support you. And we do things like go to the doctor's office together and make sure that they're asking the right kinds of questions that they wanted to before. Because, that can be kind of a nerve-wracking experience. Or sometimes we're supporting them with like family interactions or what have you. Doing things that a lot of traditional clinical services couldn't do because it was outside of their realm of expertise or sometimes out of their boundaries. But one thing that we made sure we didn't do was to put the two realms against each other. We believe that recovery has all these multiple pathways that interconnect. And so clinical treatment, medication, psychiatry, going in, whether it's a partial inpatient, outpatient setting, what have you, if that's what works for the individual we're supporting, we want to make sure that they feel supported to get that too, and identify it as, cool, this is a piece of the puzzle here. We're another piece of the puzzle here, and we want to work together to better support our communities.
Thank you. And kind of on like a macro level, have there been or are there plans to kind of network or build partnership with like these mental health professionals to really like streamline that continuum of care? Because what I'm hearing is that, right, it's another tool, but sometimes, right, peer support just doesn't cut it for some individuals, and then kind of figuring out how to reroute them to the care that they best need. Is there kind of this foundation to set that up within the kind of organizational structure?
Yeah, so I did some work on a steering committee for a movement called the Call for Change last year. So I got to learn a lot about like some of the foundational pieces of this. And so in Pennsylvania, the Call for Change was something that really kick-started the recovery movement, and peer support services were really integral in that transition. But the whole point of it was to transform Pennsylvania mental health services into recovery-oriented services. So keeping the principles of recovery at the center. And part of that was, developing something called Behavioral Health Choices, which was a program that would provide Medicaid billable services to communities all across the state. And it took a little while to roll out, but now we're at a point where like the Health Choices program covers every single county within Pennsylvania. And one of the integral pieces of that was peer support services or peer-run organizations, or and having peer incorporated into those. And we've seen that a lot of people, they did some like stakeholdering and surveying over the last couple of years to like draw up this report on like 15 years of progress since the Call for Change came out, right? And one of the things that they found was that one of the crowning achievements of the Health Choices Behavioral Health Program was the incorporation of peer support services across the state. And so now we start to see things like a managed care organization that offers clinical services might also offer peer support services. And because they're so closely connected, they're able to work together in tandem in ways that they hadn't been able to before. That's not across the board, but we are seeing that happen more and more as we go forward. And it's just a small example, or maybe a big example actually, of how these two things can work really well in tandem.
Yeah, I have one other thing I can throw in with this too. We had 2 clinical psychologists reach out to us that work for UPMC of Pittsburgh. They have a transition age youth and young adult program with 100 youth that are part of it. And the youth, are telling the psychologists that, we love the program and everything, but they really want to connect with individuals who are in their age group and that have lived experience. And they reached out to us to see if they can write us into their grant to incorporate some of our programming, specifically, peer generation and youth and young adult peer support. So what they're going to do is they're going to hire a couple certified peer specialists, have them take some of our programming, and then have those peers be part of their program to kind of incorporate them and be part of, the programming of 100 youth and young adult clients in their programming, which is pretty cool. So not only are they going to have psychiatry, but they're going to have certified peer specialists as part of their program too, which is pretty cool.
Thank you for that answer. Quick question. In addition to like the pre and post, how are you measuring young people's outcomes during the program?
So I think that all of the outcomes are still in development. We are working with Temple University on getting some advisement on kind of the best practice behind all of this, best approach to take, to really try and build an evidence base. A lot of the questions that we get when we're trying to promote this for organizations or schools is this an evidence-based program at this point? And it's not. So that is something that we are still working on and trying to take advisement from people that are more in that expertise, where I think I could speak for Kevin, myself, and Chris that the data analytics, the evaluation process is not necessarily where we specialize, but we recognize that it is an important piece of this work and we're still figuring some of that out.
Chris and Kevin and Amy, we're running short on time and there are a few questions in the chat. If you wouldn't mind taking a look at that, if you have a few minutes after you're done presenting. There's a question from Tracy, one from Travis, and then there's a couple that I typed in, but I will turn it back to Nee.
Thank you so much for answering our questions and the important work you're doing to build support systems for youth. It was really refreshing to hear that leaders around the country are looking and caring for us young people and help us build a better future. Now, with that being said, we're going to transition to lunch.
All right. Thank you all so much for having us. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you.